Copyright notice. You are free to download and copy this work in audio format for replay in any audio or video mode, and I encourage you to do so and enjoy and learn. You may redistribute it in a non-commercial fashion, that is, not for profit directly or indirectly. You may not sell or seek to profit from this publication in part or in whole, nor may you translate it into any written format for any purpose. Thank you. Bacon. The smell of hog manure in the morning spring told Greg one thing: there was food somewhere nearby. The black flies were pestering him now too, and only added to his agitation. He hadn't eaten anything in days except a single wild turkey he had managed to shoot with his rifle. That had been a mess, though, and he had eaten everything except the feathers, and that seemed like a lifetime ago. Greg followed the stench until he saw through the trees a small white farmhouse. Outside the old clapboard structure, he witnessed what looked like a man walking around and doing chores, being followed around by a pig. In the man's left hand was a bolt-action rifle with a scope of some sort. Greg had never seen an actual pet pig before, but had heard of them. This one, however, was a bit large, and as he looked through the scope, he saw it was a boar, too. He had seen stranger things in his life, but not many. Hungry, Greg approached, moving through the newly budding brush, making a bit of a rustle deliberately so the man would not be alarmed. As he drew near the farmhouse, the boar heard the stranger and turned to face in the direction of that noise, letting out a challenging grunt as he lowered his head. Greg held his rifle at the ready. The man did not seem to be alarmed, though, and he continued to hold his rifle in his left hand. Turning, he smiled and said, "Hello, mister. Are you lost? Everybody seems lost these days. The roadblock is back down the road that way, though, and they can show you where to go." He then pointed down the valley in the general direction of the main bridge. Greg had already seen that roadblock, seen a patrol of armed men, too, but had carefully and expertly avoided them both. "No, friend, I'm not lost. I'm just real hungry," Greg said, and it was true. Know where a man could get something to eat? Eddie smiled and said, "Do you like bacon? I like bacon. I like pork chops too." And with that, he turned and walked toward the house, saying over his shoulder, "Well, come on in." The boar was trotting along behind him, making little grunting noises. Greg began to salivate at the thought of a meal. He had gotten weak now and would have been glad even for an old shoe to eat. As he shuffled along behind the man, he shot a quick look back over his shoulder. The hog was eyeing Greg suspiciously, and the man said, "It's okay, Max." The hog then lay down just outside the doorway, but not before looking in Greg's direction and giving an angry snort. Greg walked gingerly around that hog. He knew better than to tangle with any kind of a pig, especially a mad one. The man opened the creaking screen door, and Greg could smell the bacon. His mouth began to water now uncontrollably. The house was a mess with odd pieces of furniture, and Greg decided the man was either crazy or a bit slow. He didn't care too much either way, though. He was giving him food, and that was good enough. The man hung his rifle on a hook by the front door, almost like a coat. "Have a seat, friend," the man said, stoking up the stove with a few pieces of wood. On the counter sat a huge slab of bacon. Satisfied with the fire, Eddie picked up a rather large butcher knife and expertly sliced off several generous pieces with a flourish and threw them into the skillet. The bacon began to sizzle and pop immediately. The smell was heavenly. Greg didn't seem to care that the man hadn't washed his hands first or that the knife was grubby. He would have eaten out of the dirt as hungry as he was. Laying down the knife and turning toward his guest, he introduced himself. "My name's Eddie. Folks call me Slow Eddie." Wiping his hand on his trousers first, he offered that hand to Greg and said in an odd way, "I offer you the right hand of fellowship, my friend." Greg shifted the rifle to his left hand and said, "My name is Greg." Eddie turned away and said, "We're almost ready for supper, Greg. Smells good, doesn't it?" Greg grunted and sat back, causing the old chair to creak and groan a bit, then leaned his rifle against the wall behind him. Soon the bacon was cooked to a golden brown, expertly. Eddie served up several generous pieces onto a couple of somehow clean dishes and set forks and knives out too. Quickly, he poured up 2 glasses of water from a pitcher. "Sorry, I got no coffee, friend. Fresh out." Greg mumbled, "No problem," through a mouthful of greasy bacon, swallowed, and then said, "Is this your place? Are you alone here?" Eddie sat down and bowed his head and said grace. Greg stopped eating and then lied. "Sorry, friend. It's been a long time since I had good company for a meal. Forgot my manners." He changed the subject, and with his mouth full, he asked, "Do you live alone, Eddie?" "Nope. I got Max, of course, but I also got friends here in town, too. One day maybe I'll get me a wife, but I'm okay for now." He said the last with a look of consternation on his face, and Greg thought to himself, "Good luck, buddy, especially with this place," and went back eating. After a few moments of silently stuffing their faces, Greg said, "This is good," honestly, with his mouth full of grease and running down his chin. "Plenty more where that came from, Greg," Eddie said with a smile, hopping up and throwing another slice of bacon on the griddle. The aroma was pure heaven, Greg thought, and his mind began to focus a little better now. "What's up with those roadblocks?" Greg said. Eddie smiled and responded, "The town got organized and we have patrols and everything. They come by every once in a while and check up on me too." He added magnanimously, "Sometimes I feed 'em because I got plenty of bacon and pork chops." He sat back and folded his hands, pleased with himself as he said this. "Of course, I don't need protecting like the other folks do in town. I got me that rifle and a bunch of ammo for it too. I got me Max as well." Eddie pointed toward the rifle hanging on the coat hook a few feet away. Greg noted it was a .223 bolt action and said, "How much ammo you got for that rifle, Eddie?" Eddie thought for a moment and said, "I don't know, maybe 200 or so." Greg was low on ammo and noticed that this man was very slow. Perhaps he could trick him out of it. "Say, friend, I'm in a tight spot. Could you spare that ammo?" Greg's demeanor had changed now, and Eddie felt a little uncomfortable with the way the man suddenly stood up and moved around to stand close to him. The look in his eyes made him nervous. He looked mean now, angry and cruel, like the kids who used to pick on him in school. "Oh, I kind of need those bullets, mister," he said apologetically. Eddie noticed the man was standing between him and his rifle too, as he moved even closer and said, "Well, how about if I say please? Pretty please." The look in the man's eyes was scaring Eddie now, and he said, "I don't know, mister. Ammo is hard to come by, but I guess I could give you a box or two." Greg smiled wickedly and said, "Actually, Eddie, I was thinking maybe you'd give it all to me, friend." The word friend had an ugly way of rolling out of the man's twisted mouth, and the evil in his eyes caused Eddie to tremble. "Please, mister, I can't give you all that I got. I need it to survive." Greg stepped back for a second and smiled and said, "Don't worry, Eddie. You won't have to worry about surviving." In a flash, Greg picked up the large knife and stabbed Eddie in the chest. Eddie had never been in a fight in his life. He had been beaten up once, though. A bully had punched him in the chest hard, and this felt just like that, only worse. The man punched him again and again in the chest and stomach, and Eddie didn't know why the man was smiling now. The world was starting to wobble, and as his eyes closed, Eddie thought of Max, of his friends, of Miss Jacqueline. Greg went through the house and found a backpack and filled it with ammo and food and other belongings he needed, things like a hunting knife, an old map, and a compass. He took a pillowcase from the bed and filled it with more food. Strapping Eddie's .223 rifle to the rucksack, along with the pillowcase of food, he slipped out the back door and into the woods, keeping an eye on his back trail to make sure that hog didn't come after him. The tumbleweeds. The maple tree outside was budding now and looked quite beautiful in the dusk to Rachel. It looked hopeful, perhaps an omen of her life even. How quickly things had turned around for her now. She was surrounded by love, by family and friends. Uncle Caleb was so strong, so kind. The look of sorrow in his eyes when she told him what had happened to her. How he had held her close, just like when she was a little girl. While her plight had been kept a secret in some way, she was not made ashamed. Indeed, many gentle Amish folk had been victimized early on, but their resiliency and adaptability as a people now made them thrive. Everyone knew that times were hard, and it made the church stronger, purified their beliefs, made them look out for one another all the more. The bishop had a few weeks back called an emergency meeting and urged the brethren to share what arms and ammunition they had, to ensure that each home had at least one firearm to protect themselves. Strict rules were passed for the use of these weapons. No violence against anyone else, except those they intended to do harm to them, and then only as a means of self-defense, never in offense. Uncle Caleb had been given the 12-gauge pump shotgun and a bit of training on it. He carried it with him now all the time. The midwives had helped Rachel, and she found out she was not pregnant, much to her relief. She was mortified that this might be the case, but they were certain it was not so. She feared also she might have AIDS or something else, but trusted that God did all things for His reasons. Overall, she was optimistic, but still woke up with fearful nightmares. Uncle Caleb had a good solution, though. He had her busy with chores within just a few days, and she enjoyed being a part of the farm now, to earn her keep, to put things behind her. She was young and was recovering quickly. The snow had melted now, and the roads were cleared. The community were moving about in their carriages and wagons, and she thought it odd there were no cars, no English coming through as they once had. She had just finished prayers and was about to turn in when she saw the glint of light from something and squinted to see what it was. Nearly a half-mile from the farm was a stand of trees. That was part of the farm's woodlot. She could see a dark-colored truck now, faint, but if she looked hard, there it was. She could see figures moving about in the dusk. Fearfully and quickly she threw on her robe and ran to wake her aunt and uncle. Uncle Caleb put on coat and hat and took his shotgun at the ready and headed off to investigate. He was so brave, so determined, Rachel thought. "Please be careful, Uncle. Please," she implored. He turned and touched her face and smiled and said, "I will be good, child. I will go with God." She knew he was not a foolish man, and that he would trust God, but also knew better than to take presumptuous chances. She prayed that he would come back. She could not bear the thought of losing him too. Her hands shook, and she tried to be brave. Aunt Martha just smiled and went to the kitchen. "Come, Rachel, if I know Caleb, we will be having company. That man never met a stranger." Rachel could not believe that she was being so calm, so positive in times like these, but she hurried in to help. In the kitchen, Rachel understood exactly why the Amish were being targeted. They had eschewed so much of modern society with its focus on frivolity, fashion, and pride. Instead, they had been a simple, very basic and down-to-earth people. As such, they were little affected by the collapse. The kitchen was but one evidence of this. It needed no electricity. It was well stocked, and there was plenty of fresh food put back. "Grind the grain, please, dear," Aunt Martha said as she rekindled a flame in the stove. Soon the kitchen was alive with the smell of baking bread, eggs frying, and cheese melting. How nice it was to eat again, to be safe, to be normal. A small tear of thanks ran down her face as she prayed that her life would not be changed again. Soon the clatter of an engine in the farmyard announced the return of Uncle Caleb. Rachel ran to the window to see a truck being pulled around and being parked in the back behind as Uncle Caleb hopped out of the cab and opened the doors. Shortly, 3 men followed Caleb up and into the house. One of the men was a little taller than the rest, and she noted there was something distinct about him. All 3 were polite as they entered, but this one took extra time to wipe his feet before he came in. They carried rifles and set these gently in the corner of the hallway near the kitchen. One of them, a large barrel-chested man, smiled and inhaled deeply of the aroma and said, "Ah, home cooking, I have missed it so much." Uncle Caleb began with introductions. "Martha, Rachel, these are our guests tonight. Mr. McMonigal, Mr. Clarence, and Mr. Phelps." Uncle Caleb was being formal, and one of them said, "Please, just call me Butch." The other said, "Oh, I'm just Thomas." And the tall one said, "I'm Joshua." Rachel looked down at the ground shyly and smiled as she thought, a good Christian name. When she looked up, he was looking at her. There was something about his green eyes. They were kind but very strong as he regarded her for a moment. his eyes locking with hers a bit long before he smiled and bowed his head briefly. And then Aunt Martha was ushering them all to the table. Uncle Caleb said grace, and then the women flitted around shuttling food to the table. Joshua said very little, and she noted that he ate quite hungrily and that they all ate so very fast. How do they digest their food, eating like that, she wondered. No matter, though. After supper the plates were cleared and the men sat speaking a bit. Joshua said very little, but when he did, she noted that his words had a sort of power to them, a purpose. He was not given to idle chatter as the big Irishman was, not withdrawn like Thomas. She decided he was very much like her Uncle Caleb. As she took his plate, Joshua spoke to her and said, "Thank you, Rachel," and looked at her again in the eye. He was not being forward or crude, she decided, but he just had this serious and strong way about him. She did not know what to make of him, but thought how safe she felt with him there, especially with Joshua. After dinner, she was afraid the men might be leaving, and Aunt Martha whispered to her at the sink, "It's okay, dear, they're staying." She smiled at her with a merry little grin, and Rachel wondered why she had put it that way, why she was smiling. What did she mean, "don't worry"? Still, she was very glad for this. The men said they would prefer to sleep in the barn, but Uncle Caleb would have none of that, and insisted they be put up in the room down at the end of the hall. Later, as Rachel slipped into bed, she thought of Joshua, his strong eyes and his powerful words. She wished that he would stay somehow. He made her feel very safe. She asked God if he could let them stay, but the men had said they were headed north and they would be gone in the morning. She fell asleep, though, secure, but also sad. Tough as nails. Linda was amazed at Leroy's recovery after seeing the doctor. Although it was risky, they had used some animal antibiotics on his wounds, and this had helped immensely in his recovery. The doctor had explained how Leroy was at a tipping point. If he didn't recover soon, he would degenerate hopelessly. Leroy had wanted to get up and help, and kept talking about not wanting to be a burden. Finally, Liz had enough and said, "Look, you have two choices, mister. Either you get better or we're going to put you out on the ice, Eskimo style, and I'd lose my license for that, so you only got one choice. Got it?" It was a rhetorical question, of course, and Leroy had immediately complied, smiling. He was now up and around, though, helping where he could with his one good arm. He was spending a lot of time at the fire station helping there, mostly watching the radios, and also going over to help David with the ham setup occasionally. Liz explained the story about Linda to him, to which Leroy remarked how he also had a daughter that age and prayed that she was okay. But he didn't know for sure. Everyone had family and kin somewhere out there, and there was a big question mark surrounding them all. "Liz, I need to get back to my place," Leroy stated almost sadly. "I wish I could stay when you people have been so good to me, but this isn't where I belong." She smiled. She knew he lived less than 20 miles away, which before the collapse was nothing. Now it was a day's journey on foot, a little less if by horse or bicycle. "You are almost ready, cowboy. Just a couple more days," she assured him. Leroy's arm was still in the bandage, and Liz knew it would be a lot longer than that, but she also knew that look in his eyes, the impatient and almost fearful look. "I don't have anybody there in particular. My wife and I split up years ago," he said sadly. "But I have neighbors and friends, and we were just starting to figure things out." Liz nodded and said, "Leroy, I think we're all just figuring it out." She didn't bother to tell him how she and Steve, Al and Jacqueline had started planning for this years ago. "You didn't come to us by accident, Leroy. God has a purpose for everything he does." Leroy seemed perplexed by that, for he was not a believer, at least not yet anyway, but Liz never let that bother her with anyone. She wasn't born believing either, so to speak. "Now back to bed with you," Liz stated, switching back into nurse mode. "If you are going home in a couple of days, you will need to be strong and rested." She knew the stress of the uncertainty about his home, added with the fact and the gravity of his injuries, meant he was far from out of the woods, and she didn't want to lose her patient, not after they had put so much into saving him. She tried not to think of the fact that they had used almost all of their bandages and the few pain pills and medicine. She went to the library and pulled out several books on herbal medicine and home remedies. She had never been a fan of these things in the past. Why bother when you have cheap and easy medicine? Now, though, it may be their only choice. Time to get smart on this stuff, she thought, setting the books on the nightstand in her room before pulling on her work boots. After farm work, tonight there may be some time and energy left for reading. The recruits. Standing on the roof in the morning sunlight, strong wind blowing on his face, the ox looked down to the front of the armory, at the small throng of civilians who were milling around there. Mitchell was interviewing them one at a time inside. When locals had seen the armory was occupied, many had come forward, presuming the government was here to save them. There was a stench in the air now. The snow was melting, and it was dead bodies. Mitchell and some of his combat vets told him they smelled it too, and rightly identified it. It made sense to the ox. All those people who had fled from the cities, fled from their homes, or simply been shot or murdered in the riots, looting and chaos. He wondered what it must smell like near New York City right about now. Just 2 days ago, PFC Boudreau had told the ox about his family up in Canada near Quebec. Ox listened half-heartedly until he realized that Boudreau had an idea in his mind. He had a plan. The farmland was rich, but more importantly, Ox remembered that the Canadians had strict gun control laws. This would be perfect for them. Unarmed victims were exactly what they needed. Easy to control, easy to rob. Ox had an idea that the border was definitely unguarded. Back to the land. Fuel was scarce for our equipment, but now the gasifier technology was there. We just had to monkey around with it. We were already running the town hall and the emergency center with it, and even the VFW, although not 24/7. Our local blacksmith was running the shop and doing an excellent business in building these units from a variety of sources, and was even hooking some up to generators and selling them as complete running packaged units. We were not short of wood up here, and so this seemed to go the way we should. We would never, of course, have the 24/7 convenience of electricity again, except those of us who had battery banks and inverters to charge with the gasifiers. But this was so much better than having no power at all. A single-horse electric motor would do the work of a single human being, could multiply your productivity by that much. Electricity and combustion had made our society as wealthy and productive as it once was. The gasifier would help us get some of that back. Emil's blacksmith shop was also working on both barter and credit. If you had a good name, you could get credit, and he was working for promised food as much as actual in-hand food. As such, he would be able to focus on his new business, and I predicted he would be the wealthiest man in town, as he had a service none else could duplicate and ran it like the serious and sharp businessman he was. My Ford 8N tractor had been equipped with such a gasifier, and I would give Emil the equivalent of a month's supply of real food, including 300 eggs, which were quite valuable at the moment, as well as 3 cords of split wood. I had my own gasifier hooked up to the generator for our house, but this one was used to power my much larger tractor. The gasifier unit was mounted on the left front of the tractor, and it was producing nearly 3/4 of the amount of power that it had once used on gasoline. We still had the fuel stores, of course, and the gasoline would not last forever. That would be used for the smaller gas engines, such as on the chainsaws and the tillers and tractors. When it was gone, the only possible choice might be ethanol, but it took a bushel of corn to make 2.5 gallons of ethanol. And when you factored in all the tilling and plowing necessary to grow corn on a large scale, the only reason we even had an ethanol program for gasoline in the past was the political payoff for corporate-run agribusiness. I thank God for changing the desires of my heart when I was still in my 20s, before I was saved. I loved motorcycles and fast cars. After my salvation, I left gardening and tractors. Now it was paying off. Those decades of study, the almost obsessive desire to have a farm, to have land, Because of this love, I had worked hard and sacrificed, and now it was all coming to fruition. I had a wide rotary tiller on the back of the tractor and used that to plow the garden beds for our fields, working with the contour of the land. The neighbors also wanted me to plow theirs up as well, and I had disked the fields down yesterday along with mine just for this. Today, I would have to till nearly 6 total acres. The bucket on the front of the tractor was loaded with split wood for my fuel and would need to be replenished. Wood was free, but it cost labor still. It took gas for the chainsaws. Emil had a solution for that too, though. A way to hook up an electric motor to your chainsaw, and you could run that off of your generator, which in turn ran off of wood. My Motorola was turned off because I could not have heard it over the tractor. I saw Steve and Liz and Jacqueline running up the hill, so I shut the engine down. Steve ran to me, and breathlessly he said, "Tried to call. Couldn't reach you." Jacqueline, not far behind Steve, rushed straight up and threw her arms around my waist, crying, and put her head in my chest. "Somebody killed Eddie. It was horrible." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Do you mean Slow Eddie?" I knew it was him because he was the only Eddie we all knew, and he was well liked, especially by Jacqueline. She sobbed and hung on tightly to my shirt. Liz also had tears in her eyes, and she said, "It was murder, Hal." Steve and Jacqueline nodded. We called it in, and the sheriff came right away. My rifle was slung on my back, and my chest rig was in the bucket with the firewood. I threw them on, and together we ran to Eddie's house. This has been Chapter 15 of the Enovel survival novel, The Walls Came Tumbling Down. Tune in next week, Friday, for Chapter 16.